Good evening. Doing something a bit different tonight. I'm going to start a bedtime story. So you guys are joining me in my house while I read a bedtime story to my girls. We're starting a new book tonight, which is called Finn Family Moomintroll. It's by a Finnish author called Tove Jansson. It's a really wonderful book. It's one of my very favourites from when I was a child. It's all sorts of strange creatures, including these guys who are called Moomins. Moomins are really lovely people. They like looking after their valley and their home and their friends around them. And they never mean anybody any harm. And they have these strange and unusual adventures. So we're going to find out about them. Now, the first thing you should know is that every winter they hibernate. They go to sleep for the whole of winter and wake up when it starts to get to spring. And as we're hitting spring now, it seems like a good time to read this book. Okay, hope you enjoy it. One grey morning, the first snow began to fall in the Valley of the Moomins. It fell softly and quietly, and in a few hours, everything was white. Moomintroll stood on his doorstep and watched the valley nestle beneath its winter blanket. Tonight, he thought, we shall settle down for our long winter's sleep. All Moomintrolls go to sleep about November. This is a good idea too if you don't like the cold and the long winter darkness. Shutting the door behind him, Moomintroll stole in to his mother and said, "Snow has come." "I know," said Moomin Mama. "I have already made up all your beds with the warmest blankets. You're to sleep in the little room under the eaves with Sniff." "But Sniff snores so horribly," said Moomintroll. "Couldn't I sleep with Snufkin instead?" "As you like, dear," said Moomin Mama. "Sniff can sleep in the room that faces east." So the Moomin family, their friends, and all their acquaintances began solemnly and with great ceremony to prepare for the long winter. Here's their house, all buried under snow as they all settle down. You can see why I'd rather sleep through that. Moomin Mama laid the table for them on the veranda, but they only had pine needles for supper. It's important to have your tummy full of pine if you intend to sleep all the winter. When the meal was over, and I'm afraid it didn't taste very nice, they all said good night to each other, rather more carefully than usual, and Moomin Mama encouraged them to clean their teeth. Then Moomin Papa went round and shut all the doors and shutters and hung a mosquito net over the chandelier so that it wouldn't get dusty. Then everyone crept into his bed and, making a cosy nest for himself, pulled his blanket over his ears and thought of something nice. But Moomintroll sighed a little and said, "I'm afraid we shall waste an awful lot of time." "Don't worry," answered Snufkin. "We shall have wonderful dreams, and when we wake up, it'll be spring." Mumbled Moomintroll sleepily, but he'd already drifted away into a hazy dream world. Outside, the snow fell, thick and soft. It already covered the steps and hung heavily from the roofs and eaves. Soon Moomin House would be nothing but a big round snowball. The clocks stopped ticking one by one. Winter had come. Chapter 1, in which Moomintroll, Snufkin and Sniff find the Hobgoblin's hat. How 5 small clouds unexpectedly appear, and how the Hemulan finds himself a new hobby. One spring morning at 4 o'clock, the first cuckoo appeared in the Valley of the Moomins. He perched on the blue roof of Moomin House and cuckooed 8 times, rather hoarsely to be sure, for it was still a bit early in the spring. Then he flew away to the east. Moomintroll woke up and lay a long time looking at the ceiling before he realised where he was. He had slept 100 nights and 100 days, and his dreams still thronged about his head trying to coax him back to sleep. But as he was wriggling round, trying to find a cosy new spot to sleep, he caught sight of something that made him quite wide awake. Snufkin's bed was empty. Moomintroll sat up. Yes, Snufkin's hat had gone too. "Goodness gracious me," he said, tiptoeing to the open window. Nah-ha! Snufkin had been using the rope ladder. Moomintroll scrambled over the windowsill and climbed cautiously down on his short legs. He could see Snufkin's footprints plainly in the wet earth, wandering here and there and rather difficult to follow, until suddenly they did a long jump and crossed over themselves. "He must have been very happy," decided Moomintroll. He did a somersault here. That's clear enough. Suddenly Moomintroll lifted his nose and listened. Far away, Snufkin was playing his happiest song. All small beasts should have bows in their tails. And Moomintroll began to run towards the music. Down by the river, he came upon Snufkin, who was sitting on the bridge, with his legs dangling over the water, his old hat pulled down over his ears. Here he is. There's Moomintroll, and there's Snufkin in his hat sat next to him. Hello, said Moomintroll, sitting down beside him. Hello to you, said Snufkin, and went on playing. The sun was up now and shone straight into their eyes, making them blink. They sat swinging their legs over the running water, feeling happy and carefree. They had had many strange adventures on this river, and had brought home many new friends. Moomintroll's mother and father always welcomed all their friends in the same quiet way, just adding another bed and putting another leaf in the dining room table. And so Moomin House was rather full, a place where everyone did what they liked and seldom worried about tomorrow. Very often unexpected and disturbing things used to happen, but nobody ever had time to be bored, and that is always a good thing. When Snufkin came to the last verse of his spring song, he put his mouth organ in his pocket and said, Is Sniff awake yet? I don't think so, answered Moomintroll. He always sleeps a week longer than the others. Then we must certainly wake him up, said Snufkin as he jumped down. We must do something special today, because it's going to be fine. So Moomintroll made their secret signal under Sniff's window. 3 ordinary whistles first, and then a long one through his paws, and it meant, There's something doing. They heard Sniff stop snoring, but nothing moved up above. Once more, said Snufkin, and they signalled, even louder than ever before. Then the window banged up. I'm asleep, shouted a cross voice. Come on down and don't be angry, said Snufkin. We're going to do something very special. Then Sniff smoothed out his sleep-crinkled ears and clambered down the rope ladder. I should perhaps mention that they had rope ladders under all the windows because it took so long to use the stairs. It certainly promised to be a fine day. Everywhere befuddled little creatures, just woken from their long winter sleep, poked about, rediscovering old haunts, and busied themselves airing clothes, brushing out their moustaches and getting their houses ready for the spring. Many were building new homes, and I am afraid some were quarrelling. You can wake up in a very bad temper after such a long sleep. The spirits that haunted the trees sat combing their long hair, and on the north side of the tree trunks, baby mice dug tunnels amongst the snowflakes. Happy spring, said an elderly earthworm, and how was the winter with you? Very nice, thank you, said Moomintroll. Did you sleep well, sir? Fine, said the worm. Remember me to your father and mother? So they walked on, talking to a lot of people in this way, but the higher up the hill they went, the less people there were. And at last they only saw 1 or 2 mother mice sniffing around and spring cleaning. It was wet everywhere. Nasty, said Moomintroll, picking his way gingerly through the melting snow. So much snow is never good for a Moomin. Mother said so. And he sneezed. Listen, Moomintroll, said Snufkin, I have an idea. What about going up to the top of the mountain and making a pile of stones to show that we were the first to get there? Yes, let's, said Sniff, and set off at once so as to get there before the others. When they reached the top, the March wind gambolled around them, and the blue distance lay at their feet. To the west was the sea, to the east the river looped around the lonely mountains. To the north the great forest spread its green carpet, and to the south the smoke rose from Moomintroll's chimney, for Moomin Mama was cooking the breakfast. But Sniff saw none of these things, because on the top of the mountain lay a hat, a tall black hat. Someone has been here before, he said. Moomintroll picked up the hat and looked at it. It's a rarey hat, he said. Perhaps it will fit you, Snufkin. No, said Snufkin, who loved his old green hat. It's much too new. Perhaps Father would like it, mused Moomintroll. Well, anyway, we'll take it with us, said Sniff. But now I want to go home. I'm dying for some breakfast, aren't you? I should say I am, said Snufkin. And that was how they found the hobgoblin's hat, and took it home with them, without guessing for one moment that this would cast a spell on the Valley of the Moomins, and that before long they would all see strange things. Shall I show them the hobgoblin's hat? Yeah, here it is. Up on top of the hill where they found it. You can just see it there. Sniff looking at it. Sniffs the big mouse. I've got a hat like this, haven't I? Maybe I should wear it tomorrow when I read. Maybe. When Moomintroll, Snufkin and Sniff went out onto the veranda, the others had already had their breakfast and gone off in various directions. Moomin Papa was alone, reading the newspaper. Oh, well, so you have woken up too, he said. Remarkably little in the paper today. A stream burst its dam and swamped a lot of ants. All saved. The first cuckoo arrived in the valley at 4 o'clock and then flew off to the east. This is a good omen, but a cuckoo flying west is still better. Look what we found, interrupted Moomintroll proudly. A beautiful new top hat for you. Moomin Papa put aside his paper and examined the hat very thoroughly. Then he put it on in front of the long mirror. It was rather too big for him. In fact, it nearly covered his eyes, and the effect was very curious. Mama, screamed Moomintroll, come and look at Father. Moomin Mama opened the kitchen door and looked at him with amazement. How do I look? Asked Moomin Papa. It's all right, said Moomin Mama. Yes, you look very handsome in it, but it's just a tiny bit too big. Is it better like this? Said Moomin Papa, pushing the hat back onto the back of his head. Said Moomin Mama. That's smart too, but I almost think you look more dignified without a hat. Moomin Papa looked at himself in front, behind, and from both sides, and then put the hat on the table with a sigh. You're right, he said. Some people look better without hats. Of course, dear, said Moomin Mama kindly. Now eat up your eggs, children. You need feeding up after living on pine needles all the winter. And she disappeared into the kitchen again. Well, what shall we do with the hat? Asked Sniff. It's such a fine one. Use it as a waste paper basket, said Moomin Papa. And thereupon he took himself upstairs to go on writing his life story, the heavy volume about his stormy youth. Snufkin put the hat down on the floor between the table and the kitchen door. Now you've got a new piece of furniture again, he said, grinning, for Snufkin could never understand why people like to have things. He was quite happy wearing the old suit he'd had since he was born. Nobody knows when and where that happened. And the only possession he didn't give away was his mouth organ. If you finish breakfast, we'll go and see how the Snorks are getting on, said Moomintroll. But before going into the garden, he threw his eggshell into the waste paper basket, for he was sometimes a well-brought-up Moomin. The dining room was now empty. In the corner between the table and the kitchen door stood the hobgoblin's hat, with the eggshell in the bottom. And then something really strange happened. The eggshell began to change its shape. This is what happens, you see. If something lies long enough in the hobgoblin's hat, it begins to change into something quite different. What that will be, you never know beforehand. It was lucky that the hat hadn't fitted Moomin Papa, because the protector of all small beasts knows what would have become of him if he'd worn it for a bit longer. As it was, he only got a slight headache, and that was over after dinner. Meanwhile, the eggshell had become soft and woolly, although it stayed white, and after a time it filled the hat completely. Then 5 small clouds broke away from the brim of the hat, sailed out onto the veranda, thudded softly down the steps, and hung there, just above the ground. The hat was empty. Goodness gracious me, said Moomintroll. Is the house on fire? Asked the Snow Maiden anxiously. The clouds were hanging in front of them without moving or changing shape, as if they were waiting for something. and the Snow Maiden put out her paw very cautiously and patted the nearest one. "It feels like cotton wool," she said in a surprised voice. The others came nearer and felt it too. "Just like a little pillow," said Sniff. Snufkin gave one of the clouds a gentle push. It floated on a bit and then stopped again. "Whose are they?" asked Sniff. "How did they get onto the veranda?" Moomintroll shook his head. "It's the queerest thing I've ever come across," he said. "Perhaps we ought to go in and fetch Mother." No, said the Snow Maiden. "We'll try them out ourselves." And she dragged a cloud onto the ground and smoothed it out with her paws. "So soft," said the Snow Maiden, and the next minute she was rocking up and down onto the cloud with loud giggles. "Can I have one too?" squealed Sniff, jumping onto another cloud. "Hops-a-daisy!" But when he said "hop," the cloud rose and made an elegant little curve over the ground. "Golly!" burst out Sniff. "It moved!" Then they all threw themselves onto the clouds and shouted, "Hop, hop, hops-a-daisy!" The clouds bounded wildly about until the Snork discovered how to steer them. By pushing a little with one foot, you could turn the cloud. If you pressed with both feet, it went forward, and if you rocked gently, the cloud slowed up. They had terrific fun, even floating up to the treetops and to the top of Moomin House. Moomintroll hovered outside Moomin Papa's window and shouted, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" He was so excited he couldn't think of anything more intelligent. Moomin Papa dropped his memoir pen and rushed to the window. "Bless my tail!" he burst out. "Whatever next?" "It'll make a good chapter for your story," said Moomintroll, steering his cloud to the kitchen window where he shouted to his mother. But Moomin Mama was in a great hurry and hurried on making resolves. "What have you found now, dear?" she said. "Just be careful you don't fall down." But down in the garden, the Snow Maiden and Snufkin had discovered a new game. They stared at each other at full speed and collided with a soft bump. Then the first to fall off had lost. "Now we'll see," cried Snufkin, urging his cloud forward, but the Snow Maiden dodged cleverly to the side and then attacked him from underneath. Snufkin's cloud capsized, and he fell on his head in the flower bed, and his hat fell over his eyes. "Third round," squeaked Sniff, who was referee and was flying a bit above the others. "That's 2, 1, ready, steady, go!" "Shall we go and fly a little flying tour together?" Moomintroll asked the Snow Maiden. "Certainly," she answered, steering a cloud up beside his. "Where shall we go?" "Let's hunt up the Hemulin and surprise him," suggested Moomintroll. They made a tour of the garden, but the Hemulin wasn't in any of his usual haunts. "He can't have gone far," said the Snow Maiden. "Last time I saw him, he was sorting his stamps." "That was 6 months ago," said Moomintroll. "Oh, so it was," she agreed. "We've slept since then, haven't we?" "Did you sleep well, by the way?" asked Moomintroll. The Snow Maiden flew elegantly over a treetop and considered a little before answering. "I had an awful dream," she said at last, "about a nasty man in a high black hat who grinned at me." "Oh, funny," said Moomintroll. "I had exactly the same dream. Had he got white gloves on too?" The Snow Maiden nodded, and slowly gliding through the forest, they pondered this a while. Suddenly they caught sight of the Hemulin, who was wandering along with his hands behind his back and his eyes on the ground. Moomintroll and the Snow Maiden made perfect 3-point landings on either side of him and called out brightly, "Good morning." "Ouch! Oh!" gasped the Hemulin. "How you frightened me. You shouldn't jump at me suddenly like that." "Oh, sorry," said the Snow Maiden. "Look what we're riding on." "That's most extraordinary," said the Hemulin. "But I'm so used to your doing extraordinary things that nothing surprises me. Besides, I'm feeling melancholy just now." "Why is that?" asked the Snow Maiden sympathetically. "On such a fine day, too." "You wouldn't understand anyway," said the Hemulin, shaking his head. Here he is, miserable looking so-and-so. "We'll try," said Moomintroll. "Have you lost a rare stamp again?" "On the contrary," answered the Hemulin gloomily. "I have them all, every single one. My stamp collection is complete. There is nothing missing." "Well, isn't that nice?" said the Snow Maiden encouragingly. "I said you'd never understand me, didn't I?" moaned the Hemulin. Moomintroll looked anxiously at the Snow Maiden, and they drew back their clouds a little out of consideration for the Hemulin's sorrow. He wandered on, and they waited respectfully for him to unburden his soul. At last he burst out, "How hopeless it all is!" And after another pause he added, "What's the use? You can have my stamp collection for the next paper chase." "But Hemulin," said the Snow Maiden, horrified, "that would be awful. Your stamp collection is the finest in the world." "That's just it," said Hemulin in despair. "It's finished. There isn't a stamp or an error that I haven't collected. Not one. What shall I do now?" "I think I'm beginning to understand," said Moomintroll slowly. "You aren't a collector anymore. You're only an owner. And that isn't nearly so much fun." "No," said the broken-hearted Hemulin. "Not nearly." He stopped and turned his puckered-up face towards them. "Dear Hemulin," said the Snow Maiden, taking him gently by the hand, "I have an idea. What about your collecting something different? Something quite new?" "That's an idea," admitted the Hemulin, but he continued to look worried because he thought he oughtn't to look happy after such a big sorrow. "Butterflies, for example?" suggested Moomintroll. "Impossible," said the Hemulin, and became gloomy again. "One of my second cousins collects them, and I can't stand him." "Film stars, then?" said the Snow Maiden. The Hemulin only sniffed. "Ornaments?" Moomintroll said hopefully. "They're never finished." But the Hemulin pooh-poohed that. "Well, then I really don't know," said the Snow Maiden. "We'll think of something for you," said Moomintroll consolingly. "Mother's sure to know. By the way, have you seen the muskrat?" "He's still asleep," said the Hemulin sadly. "He says that it's unnecessary to get up so early, and I think he's right." And with that he continued his lonely wanderings, while Moomintroll and the Snow Maiden steered their clouds right up over the treetops and rested there, rocking slowly in the sunshine. They considered the problem of the Hemulin's new collection. "What about shells?" the Snow Maiden proposed. "Or airy buttons," said Moomintroll. But the warmth made them sleepy and didn't encourage thinking, so they lay on their backs on the clouds and looked up at the spring sky where the larks were singing. And suddenly they caught sight of the first butterfly. As everyone knows, if the first butterfly you see is yellow, the summer will be a happy one. If it is white, then you will just have a quiet summer. Black and brown butterflies should never be talked about. They are much too sad. But this butterfly was golden. There they are on their clouds. Snow Maiden looking at the butterfly which had just appeared in front of the sun. "What can that mean?" said Moomintroll. "I've never seen a golden butterfly before." "Gold is even better than yellow," said the Snow Maiden. "You wait and see." When they got home to dinner, they met the Hemulin on the steps. He was beaming with happiness. "Well," said Moomintroll, "what is it?" "Nature study," shouted the Hemulin. "I shall botanise. The Snork thought of it. I shall collect the world's finest herbarium." And the Hemulin spread out his skirt to show them his first find. The Hemulin always wore a dress that he'd inherited from his aunt. I believe all Hemulins wear dresses. It seems strange, but there you are. Among the earth and leaves lay a very small spring onion. "Gagea lutea," said the Hemulin proudly. "#1 in the collection. A perfect specimen." And he went in and dumped the whole lot on the dining table. "Put it in the corner, Hemel dear," said Moomin Ma, "because I want to put the soup there. Is everybody in? Is the muskrat still sleeping?" "Like a pig," said Sniff. "Have you had a good time today?" asked Moomin Mama, when she had filled all the plates. "Wonderful!" cried the whole family. Next morning, when Moomintroll went to the woodshed to let out the clouds, they had all disappeared, every one of them. And nobody imagined that it had anything to do with the eggshell, which was once again lying in the hobgoblin's hat. Hopefully, I'll be able to reach out to do tomorrow. These guys are willing. See you then.